Mr. Jeremy, thank you very much for doing this. So in the United States, I think most people, to the extent they're paying attention, are watching what's happening in Iran and have a sense that what's happening between Russia and NATO, Ukraine, the United States, the festering war in Eastern Europe is kind of a stalemate and nothing really is happening there. I don't know if that's true. Assess what you think is happening between Russia and Ukraine and its proxies right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think it is true, Tucker. I think that the general sense in the West is that you'll hear from some people that Russia's losing on the battlefield and that the Russian economy is about to fall apart. I mean, I've heard it time and time again, and there's no evidence to support either of those things. The battlefield issue is poorly understood, and I think, and the reason is that people don't understand Russia's motivations and they don't understand what the strategy is. In an article I wrote recently on the coming war with Russia, I said that Clausewitz, who was the great political philosopher of war, said that the most important decision that a military man and a politician can make is to understand the nature of the war. And I don't think that the West has understood the nature of the war with Russia, nor, for that matter, with Iran. What they haven't understood with Russia is that this is, as far as Russia is concerned, is an existential war. You know, they are fighting to make sure that Russia is preserved. And when you get people like Kaja Kallas saying that Russia must be broken up, who can blame them? I think, had we understood that, I think that would be a start. And unfortunately, we're approaching the war, it seems to me, as a negotiation with arms. You know, and if we increase a bit of pressure on Russia, then they'll eventually come back to the negotiating table. What they've missed, though, is that Russia, I think, has a clear strategy, and I can't be sure about it. I'm not in the Russian general staff, but I think it's got its response. Diesel is critical for farming, for fishing, for food logistics, for construction, for running the other two primary energy sources. That's renewable energy and nuclear energy. I could go on and on. It really is the critical fuel, and we've switched ourselves off to it. And of course, having switched ourselves off and increased our prices in Europe, which of course is having an effect on our economies, especially Germany's economy, we're now in the situation where the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And so we've got a second wham on top of the first wham. So talk about being in a very, very fragile position. It's an extremely weak position, not least of all because we import about 12 million barrels a day into oil into the European region. Norway is reasonably self-sufficient. In fact, Norway is completely self-sufficient, and we get about 45% or so of our hydrocarbons from the North Sea, although that's reducing. But Europe generally is extremely vulnerable. So what you've got is a situation which is that our energy infrastructure is being written down at a time when we have no chance of defending our skies against it. And again, this is why I was trying to actually make the point to people who are prepared to think about this, what this war might look like, because the economic consequences of this would be profound. Mathematically, there's a really close relationship between the use of energy and GDP. It's extremely close. It's close to 1. It's about sort of 0.99 or something.
Yes.
So what that means is when you take energy out of the system, then you are going to have a consequent effect, which is similar in rough order of magnitude on your economy. So if we take 10% of the world's energy away, then surprise, surprise, don't be surprised if we get a global reduction in GDP of 10%. Now, that's getting close to a depression. Indeed, it's on the borderline of a depression. But going back to Europe, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Supporting Americans looking to fulfill the dream of owning a home, with mortgage rates currently in the 5s. American Financing saves its customers an average of $800 a month. That's about $10,000 a year. It's not just a loan, it's a true financial reset. We recommend American Financing. They're called America's home for home loans for a reason. So get out of credit card debt. I mean, it is just crazy to borrow money. No judgment, but it doesn't make any sense to borrow money at that rate. If you want out, call 800-685-5696. 800-685-5696 or visit americanfinancing.net/Tucker. I think one disadvantage that the Europeans have is they don't understand how hated they are by the people planning these wars. I think it's true of all the wars of the last 100 years. I think, at least in my country, the foreign policy strategists, the neocons who are driving all of this, truly hate Europe and would like to see it destroyed. The Israelis hate Europe. And Europeans can't seem to admit that to themselves. It's very obvious by the effects. So let's say that the Russians did lob a hypersonic missile into Rotterdam or into the UK. Everyone knows, it's very obvious that Europe can't mount a conventional war against Russia. They would lose instantly. The one thing they do have, however, is nuclear weapons. So how much incentive would there be to use a nuclear weapon in response?
It's a $64,000 question, and I actually cover that in the article. I think that what we're talking about is that if either Britain or France, the two nations with nuclear weapons, chose to respond with nuclear weapons, that essentially is committing national suicide.
Yes,
I would expect the Russians to respond. Let's forget they've got nearly 5,500 nuclear weapons, just short of that. And I think Britain's got sort of, I think there might be 200 as those sorts of figures. I think that that a prime minister or president of France who is prepared to use nuclear weapons to support a conventional war, which we were likely to lose in the first place, I think that would be a very, it's a suicidal call, not just about self-interest. But I suspect the Chinese were thinking that as an exporting nation, they were thinking long and hard about the impact that the Strait of Hormuz closure would have on the rest of the Far East. Because there are other nations in the Far East which are much more vulnerable. Japan had a very big oil reserve. But places like Taiwan, the 90% of the semiconductors are made in Taiwan. So places like Taiwan were much more vulnerable. So I suspect one of the reasons China may have done that is not just not just for tactical reasons, but also for thinking about their export markets, because reduction in oil in these other places could have a significant impact. I don't think anybody really knows, but one of the other things to think about is that, sorry, I'll just finish. I think I would be surprised if we were not seeing consequences of this in August. And I've certainly heard some very good analysts who I follow talking about September as well. I'm a great fan of an American geophysicist called Art Berman, who's an exceptional analyst. The other thing, though, of course, is that even when the Straits of Hormuz open, then there is a lag. There's a lag on actually those the whole system getting going again. It's a bit like sort of closing off your plumbing in your pipes at home and then expect it to function perfectly. Now, one of the interesting things is that when the I can't remember what the ship's name was, a container ship blocked the Suez Canal. And for every one day that container ship blocked the Suez Canal, there's a very good merchant navy analyst called Sam Macogliano, who said it was about 6 days for the whole logistics system to recover. So even if it's 3 days, you could be talking for, as a minimum, it would be the amount of time that the straits have been closed it will take to recover. But it could be twice that, or it could be 3 times that. So I'm expecting and forecasting that we'll be looking at a significant recession starting in the autumn, and that could tip into recession when it comes to crude. It's an importer of crude to the tune of about 6.5 million barrels per day. And even if you've got access, through, for example, Venezuela or Canada, oil's a fungible commodity. So you may have access, but the prices of the oil are going to go up. So I don't know what it's like over there in the States at the moment in terms of cost per barrel. It's up here. But if those costs were to increase significantly in the next 2 to 3 months, I would imagine that would not be the sort of run you want into the midterms. And I would be surprised if they don't increase significantly. And even if you open the Strait of Hormuz, I would be surprised if the lag in the system is such that you're still not suffering from the consequences of those well into the midterms and probably into the new year.
So oil, Brent crude was like priced in dollars, I think 71 last week.
Mm.
If you'd told me almost 4 months after the closure of the strait that it would be 71, I would never have believed that.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Were you surprised by it, that it's so
Yes,
low?
very, very.
Yeah.
I was just as surprised as you, and I think most of the analysts were. But I think a lot of it is to do with the lag. It's also there's this distinction between the futures markets and the actual delivery. I was talking to a Singaporean colleague last month, and he said that, and I don't know whether this is still the case, that notwithstanding what Brent was at or what WTI was at, that in Singapore they were buying crude for $200 a barrel. So the difference is the interesting one. It's what people are actually paying for it. I mean, there may be a short-term lag, who knows, but that's the open question. The so-called crack spread between what you're paying, what you're forecasting to pay in the futures markets, and what you're actually paying on the day.
How does a country exist at $200 a barrel?
Yeah, well, fortunately, Singapore is an extremely efficient country.
Yes.
So but that must be having political effects, I guess, as well. It's quite a small country. I was so surprised when I had $200 a barrel. I didn't ask much more.